Jack here from Gravel Bike California as your tanning consultant, as we're here in Palm Springs, ready to explore Desert X. Now, this outdoor exhibition has taken place since 2017 with temporary installations. They're here only during the spring. We're taking gravel bikes because some of the stuff is off-road and the roads around here are built for cars, so we'll see where it takes us. Let's burn! Or roll. Taking place every 2 years during the spring, Desert X is a free and open experience thanks to a nonprofit with temporary sets of installations for each edition strewn across the Coachella Valley that engage with the desert and acknowledge the Kauai's history. There's a bevy of information giving background and precise locations of the exhibitions, and the app is super handy out in the field. But with sites spread apart in an area 50% larger than the San Fernando Valley, we crafted this 73-mile loop, which we hope would balance the elements with efficiency. Embracing a mid-century aesthetic, we started by the Art Museum in downtown Palm Springs, surrounded by a number of unique pieces of their own. And while there was plenty of snow up on the San Jacinto Mountains, this clearly was a day where there would be no nod to winter. It was a calm start to our journey, beginning in the neighborhoods, as others were finishing up their rides to beat the heat, wading our way through homes, recalling the last season of Mad Men, with bowing out for some resort time becoming a consideration as there was one additional storyline. A little bit of a subplot today. I eschewed my regular shoes and went to gravel sandals. I think it's gonna piss Vic off. They look good. Thank you. Our first site was only 3 miles in as Desert X marked the spot, set up at this vacant hotel along the main highway. And while art may be subjective, apparently viewing hours were not, as the site was closed Tuesdays with the installation being submerged, meaning we could have used the app better.
The sculpture looks like that, Zach.
Describe it better.
Well, it's a sculpture. It looks like that.
We had a chance for instant redemption, with the next locale less than a couple of miles away, not counting overshooting it by a few blocks, getting our first quote-unquote dirt segment of the day in, as we landed on the work by Kauaian artist Gerald Clark called Immersion, which we were told was a coiled basket in a board game, learning about native tribes through the app, depending on which path you would take. But our time was brief, avoiding a big delegation from the government about to overtake, with our toughest stretch of the day ahead. Turning back onto Highway 118, you would think riding along high-speed traffic would be our biggest problem, as on paper, the 10 miles to the next stop didn't look so bad, up against a paltry 1% grade, which was our only option. But the big enemy was the massive headwind, which explains why this is a really good place for windmills, as bridges were a concern under these elements, not just regarding their lack of water, but not having a lot of wiggle room for passers-by, especially when we were thrown into that role. And while we were topping out at 13 miles per hour, we wish we had a bit more speed merging onto the 10, and happy the exit wasn't too far away, crossing the freeway for our next selection, because X marks the... I said that already. There was an advantage biking to this installation, in that we wouldn't have to hike 1.5 miles to access it, getting some jealousy vibes along the way, and even after finding it, grateful to have these two-wheel devices to finally locate the proper path. But when we did straighten our situation out, we felt lucky to view Matt Johnson's sleeping figure from all angles. Leaving Sleeping Figure led us to our most critical mapping decision as we decided to use our gravel capacities to take us through the Windmills, covering 8 miles of slight climbs and sandiness versus an extra 11 miles avoiding the highway. The locality of Whitewater was on the other side of the 10, as it didn't take long for us to get out of town, with Tamarack Road quickly shedding its paved veneer, finally getting a taste of a tailwind, which was briefly interrupted going into the wash that luckily had no water flowing from Cottonwood Canyon. Accepting the worst was just a little walking, and while Dirk took up about 1/10 of today's route, we were still happy to have wide tires for this, as our tour to power lines wrapped up quickly, but we weren't done with dirt yet. I didn't do enough R&D to anticipate these older structures, or why a rock supply set up shop here, but I saw this more of being clues, being confirmed as we were crossing the bridge that was built almost 100 years ago as part of Highway 99 that started in Calexico, which was still in amazing condition while not having to worry about cross traffic, as the old alignment has since been absorbed by the 10. Instead, our path veered off into the Windmills, glancing our steepest pitch of the day at only 8%, and while these turbines look huge from afar, they're way more quiet than you'd imagine, with their scale being even more impressive up close. Not to mention these shadows looking scaringly large. That's Swanee, look out! And I may never get to bike among the windmills of the Netherlands, but I definitely enjoyed the unity behind nature, kind of forgetting that I had some biking in front of me, as the descent required some grip unless you wanted to take the washboard head on, exiting out as we had only just passed the first quarter mark of distance for the day. It didn't seem like we had invested this much in climbing to get this much downhill, as it was nice to cook off some miles, halted by playing Frogger over the 29 Palms Highway as the ride got discerningly quiet after, taking the parallel Worsley Road that superseded the highway we just crossed. And it was hard to find landmarks within this barren landscape, yet a parked car was enough to distinguish itself, meaning we had likely found our next installation, and while the mechanics were abstract, this was our consensus favorite of the day. The sci-fi theme of Namak Nazar might have been hard to deconstruct, but definitely complemented this environment.
Blooming on the crystalline shore while its gatherers live in soot, so diffuses through the rotting monument of civilization.
The next 6 miles on Pearson was desert fabulous, rolling by the occasional isolated tract of homes, entering now into desert hot springs, where you'd have to go into your hot tub time machine when these channels last held water, as I was surprised my sandals were still pretty comfy at this point. But these puppies did need a break, with our first water stop 27 miles in, and while there were a number of colorful murals in town, we were starting to feel the pressure to keep moving as temps hit 90. It was time to take advantage of our off-road capabilities again, searching for the next installation, which seemed dubious on gravel bikes at first, but I think the 1/5 of a mile relief was worth it, coming across the first warning of this kind, approaching this technologically oriented herd, as this piece entitled Searching for the Sky harkens the Wild West, with these space-age panels riding a series of mechanical bulls, which kept us more at peace than if we were in Pamplona. We were ready to hit our next stop, being just over a mile south as the crow flies, with some minor finagling to go around. And while we were close, our maps didn't show the dirt road is closed, causing some improvisation and backtracking, coming across another questionable dead end, not serving as a morale booster.
It's all part of the adventure.
After finding a farther but better gravel alternative, we hit the ironic smiling phase of the ride, noting this detour took us an extra 20 minutes of sun exposure, as this loose sand helped us get more of it, having to hoof it at the end, getting just a quick view here, with this last expedition getting us behind schedule. We were hoping to hammer the miles off, going through some vacant territory that included the historic B-Bar H Ranch, which was the place for celebrities to go in the 1930s, soon finally making our way across the 10, still not quite to today's halfway point, and if sand is a guilty pleasure of yours, then you might have a second thought about it riding a bike, as inheriting the land does you no favors, and while it was a little unnerving riding next to freeway speeds, we did slow for the work of photographer Tyree Nichols, that Desert X paid tribute after beaten to death after a traffic stop earlier this year. Now that we were back on the more urban roads, we took whatever chance we had to get off of them, finding a segment of CV Link that provides multimodal connections across the Coachella Valley in various stages of development, as we got to experience this 2-mile stretch, preferring this enjoyment of peace and solitude, following the channel that leads to the Salton Sea, with little great features like lights built into the concrete, to shade shelters and water fountains along the way, making us efficient opponents to golf cart racing. And while there were many high notes, you tend to remember the low ones, like this awkward ending on Ramon Road, which was no fun riding after crossing, with Google Maps not being properly forthcoming on bike lanes, as we opted onto the sidewalks from time to time. And though this trend started off in Cathedral City, there wasn't much to differentiate one municipality versus another, as we had just grabbed water in what could have been any of them. And while we did finally hit our next destination, fool me twice, as this one was also closed on Tuesdays.
Obviously doing research doesn't pay you off at all.
We had 2 installations left over 25 miles. And at this point, we took sidewalks over bike lanes if they provided more shade, thinking I was seeing a mirage, looking at this resource-needy development, which was another opportunity for a small company like Disney to grow. But with no fences or gate, it looked like progress was about to be made, even if we were forced into being bipeds, coming across this chain link art piece, which was a maze I didn't want to get trapped in, but the layering was its most intriguing element, that even with its limited thickness, its opacity shifted with every rotation, making movement inside disorienting, loving the contrast from afar. Trudging slowly over not wet sand, it looked like more suburb surfing ahead, until turning east onto Magnesia Falls, converging with another completed portion of the CV Link, and turning south onto San Pablo brought a separate configuration, which is the type of infrastructure we're not used to in California, with the roundabout slowing down vehicular traffic before returning to our lane, and extra accoutrements to add to our protection, ending at the spot I rented my first drop bar bike ever.
Origin story revealed!
With an incorrect turn onto Highway 118 that would set the table for later, ultimately heading south along the Pines to Palms Highway, with a mile climb dipping into the residential until pivoting back behind them as we discovered our last installation at the Holmes Adams Park, entitled Liquid, a Place, with this monolith taking a stance planted into the landscape as its bold geometry contrasted against the desert, noting up close its construction not showing permanence, meaning this experience and our placement inside is uniquely temporary.
It's really interesting when you look at this as being a moment in time. Kind of a little bit like Christo or Grassel bikes.
Even though we were technically done with Desert X, we still had 15 miles to get back to the start. And even though I had mapped out the bike best friendly route, we opted to take the Highway 118 shortcut which may not have been the right idea, riding the sidewalks to avoid those 19th hole commuters, which were empty of pedestrians but full of excess water.
Watch out!
It would have been stressful to be in this much traffic in our state for so long, switching sides of the street when sidewalks vanished, getting separated figuring out this snafu, into whatever was going on here, and even mini golf couldn't cheer me up. Passing the host hotel felt tempting for a stop as the googie architecture started to return, signaling we were making our way back into Palm Springs just in time as the sun was going down, where everyone here enjoyed their day in different ways.
Well, today came together as one of those beautiful days that you just can't plan for. Considering it was my hottest day of the year and Tuesday happened to fall on the Tuesday, this was an adventure. I mean, definitely having gravel bikes let us go off-road, explore more. Can't wait to try this again. Whole new landscape. Anyways, if you want to support us, hit the subscribe button or go to our shop or support us on Patreon so we can bring you more from the state of desert.